So in previous videos we've looked at grounding tools and we've also looked at the peaceful place or relaxation, and we can combine these to help us overcome avoidance. We use relaxation or the peaceful place to manage the anxiety or agitation which our system, our body experiences when a traumatic memory is present. If we do that, if we are relaxed, if we manage that agitation, then we are less vulnerable to, we reduce the likelihood of us suffering things like intrusive memories, of flashbacks or dissociation. We use grounding tools when those symptoms come along. Those grounding tools or exercises snap us back into the present, and by doing so they literally ground us. By being in the present, people experience themselves as more settled because those intrusive memories have gone, with our attention being back in the here and now. Going back to the Ellis and Clark model, avoidance is often part of how we cope. And frequently, individuals who have suffered trauma steer clear of things that remind them of those traumatic events, be they the place where it happened, be they reminders of the people who were involved in the trauma, or anything else that might remind them, however discreetly, of what happened. Whilst this is perfectly adaptive, it's perfectly normal and natural, it may very well get in the way of our capacity to live whole lives, or wholesome a life as possible, and go about all the things that we wish to do in all the places we wish to do them, given this avoidance is present, and given that in those circumstances we may very well be very frightened of intrusive memories or flashbacks arriving. So how do we put these tools together in order to be able to overcome avoidance? Well, what might be helpful to start off with is having an idea of what we might be avoiding, and brainstorming all of the things that we don't do anymore, all the things that we will only do if certain circumstances arrive. So I will only go to the shopping mall if I have a friend to accompany me. This is of course going to be particular to what's happened to you. So let's take an example. Let's say that I was mugged in the woods or in the park. Better example there, in the park. Okay. And now maybe I avoid going to the park because I'm very fearful it will happen again, or I'm very fearful if I go there I'm going to have flashbacks of what would happen. Maybe also, because it was in the park and there were trees around, I've become cautious around trees. They remind me about what happened and have spurned flashbacks. So maybe I also avoid streets that have trees on them and remind me of the event as it unfurled. Maybe also I avoid people who remind me of the attacker. Now we've got a real problem there. If the attacker was a common looking man in your area, let's say, then potentially we might avoid lots of different reminders of them because it's difficult to avoid other people when we're out and about. So that might mean I also wish to avoid areas which are well populated, where lots of people are there. So let's say the town centre, the shopping mall, the supermarket. I start to avoid those locations. And hopefully this gives a flavour of all the different things that we might avoid, we might have stopped doing in order to avoid flashbacks or memories of the traumatic event. You will have ones that you know, you'll have ones that you'll be able to write down. If it is the case that there are things that you can only do with a friend, or you talk to a friend about the things that are difficult for you, they might also be able to give you information on the things that we might avoid. And indeed, as you then go about to try and do things anyway, you might find circumstances that remind you that you can or can't take on. So you might discover things that you are avoiding as you go about your daily business. And as you discover those new things, those are to be added to our list too. And so what we're aiming for is a brainstormed big list of things that we don't do. And once we have that, put a rating next to each of those things, each of those activities or each of those places as to how much it distresses you, either makes you anxious or gives you reminders that are upsetting, or maybe makes you angry when you face those people or those prospects, and put a rating on them. And once you've done that on a separate sheet of paper, make a list running from top to bottom of the things that are most distressing right through to the things that are least distressing. This is technically known as a graded exposure hierarchy. So graded insofar as we've got a rating attached to which things distress us more and less. And exposure in terms of what we might choose to take on first and last. Because indeed, if we take on things which are a little anxiety provoking, we stand more of a chance of getting a good result on them and having the tools work for us. That will build our confidence so we find ourselves better able to take on those things later on or at the top of the list which are more anxiety provoking and more distressing. In short, it's almost like we can break ourselves in to the business of overcoming avoidance and getting back to the things that we can do and giving ourselves a greater sense of freedom and agency. So, there's our blueprint for what we're going to do, and we pick a task which we're going to take on. Now we come to what skills we use to help us with that. And like preparing for anything, like a job interview or an important exam, we want to be in a place where actually our agitation, our anxiety, our stress, call it what you will, is as managed as it possibly can. So we're going to want to have a good night's sleep. We're going to help ourselves do that by helpfully exercising the peaceful place before we go to bed, or whatever else there is which relaxes us sufficient to get a good a night of sleep as possible. Then we're going to get ready and we're going to do the same in the morning. So something which is relaxing to start the day off with, or before we take on this task, be it peaceful place, be it a hot water bath with bubbles, be it lying down on the couch and smelling pleasantly scented candles. Whatever it is that relaxes us, this is the way that we're getting our body and our system in as good enough a place as possible before we take on this task. And then we're going to do it. Let's say I'm going down the road that reminds me of the park. So I'll take myself to a position just before that, and I'm going to have my grounding prompts available, aren't I? Let's say I'm going to have my semi-precious stone in my pocket, and I'm going to have a lavender essential oil in the other pocket, because I know as soon as I will start to see those trees, It may very well be I'll start to feel the pain of the assault. The precious stone, something to touch, will ground me from those physical sensations. And it may be I also have smells attached to the assault, be it the smell of the attacker or the taste of blood in my mouth, which will go through to my nose and give that smell as well. But I have that lavender essential oil for if that arises. Now hopefully I'm going to be in as calm enough a place as possible, which means I can walk down that street or walk down as much of that street as I choose to without a flashback or intrusive memory. But I know I've got those things there. So I'm going to go and I'm going to ground myself as and when those memories start to come back. This is all sounding like it's going well so far, isn't it? But maybe it won't. Maybe the flashback or the intrusive memory will be overwhelming. So I will need something, which means I'll have a get-out plan. Maybe along this street I'll have figured out, there's that place where I can go into, there's that side road or that side alley, there's no trees there, there's going to be nothing to remind me. Maybe if I'm especially anxious, I'm going to need a friend in their car there who can talk me down, or if it's actually just not doable, can take me home. We can bridge to help ourselves with overcoming avoidance. But I've tried my grounding. If it doesn't work, I'm going to go into that side street. I'm going to go into my plan B. And there I'm going to ground real hard, and I'm going to try perhaps a relaxation exercise if necessary. And hopefully that will be sufficient to mean I can carry on back down the street and carry on with that exposure work. And hopefully, if it goes well, I'm going to find my anxiety levels will drop because that flashback, because that intrusive memory isn't there any longer. Or at least I've managed it to sufficiently to mean that it hasn't arisen. Maybe, if it's too difficult, we're going to have to replan. Maybe it is that we have gone home and we can't do that. And in those circumstances, problem solving this, we can look towards, is that too much of something to take on at the moment? Was that too far up the exposure hierarchy? Was it too difficult for us for now? Did we plan okay? Did we do the relaxation beforehand? Did we have a good night's sleep? Did we do the peaceful place before we went to bed, if that would be helpful? Were those things in place? Did we have the right grounding tools? Or were they grounding tools which only reminded us of the memory and made things more difficult? Did we find that other intrusions came in that we'll need to problem solve with? So if this piece of exposure, if the task that you set for yourself didn't entirely work out, don't worry so much. This is about coming back, problem solving what might have happened, perhaps choosing a different target or a different strategy next time and building yourself up to where you'd chosen before, building yourself up to this task that we just didn't have the skills for now. Hopefully though, we got a good result and we're feeling confident that that point in the hierarchy has been done and we managed it and survived it. And then we can move on to that next place up. So if it was a 5 out of 10 for anxiety that went well, we can go to a 7 out of 10 for anxiety and distress and use the same strategy, relaxation first, grounding in situ, having a plan B by which we can come back to the task, or aborting and problem solving to take it on again. Hopefully we can carry on up the exposure hierarchy and be able to have much more of a life by doing the things that we felt we couldn't previously. If we're able to do this, it will build our confidence and our feelings of self-esteem and our feelings of efficacy. We will start to live a life which is rather more similar to before the trauma than before. And what's crucially important about this is by behaving in this way, by overcoming avoidance, it will start to inform the belief or meaning part back in the Ellis and Clark model, as we'll be reminded of it here. We'll be creating different meanings for ourselves. If we can create different meaning, if we can start to challenge hurt, traumatic beliefs, it will reduce that current sense of threat, that hypervigilance, the fear, the anger, the stress, which has been brought about from the memory. And indeed, by questioning this part of the model, we may in turn be able to form new memories or reprocess the traumatic memory itself. We're getting ourselves into a very different behavioural path, which will hopefully make all of the model start to change, the whole of our experience start to change with it. So as difficult as exposure work is, as anxiety provoking as it is, this is well worth trying because the rewards can be very far reaching. Being able, in my example, to walk down the street with trees in it, or be able to go back down the park again, can be the first steps, the first moves in being able to have a much more active, confident life in which we feel more worthwhile about ourselves. What we can also do in an exposure situation is that we can start to notice what kinds of memories, if they're contained, and all of these things will help contain them, but to notice what kinds of memory comes back, or what memory comes back, and how the situation we're in is actually different. We start to spot the difference. So noticing, I'm going to be walking down that tree-lined street, and maybe memories of the assault in the park is coming back to me, and I'm remembering it, but it's contained very much in the same way any other memory might be. And I'll be aware that actually it was the park. There were trees of a certain kind all around. Maybe the trees in the street are different. Maybe they're not so thickly packed because it's a street and it isn't the park. Maybe the assault happened when it was dark, and actually now it's light in the exposure. Maybe during the assault no one was around, yet there are one or two other people now milling about doing their own thing. And by doing this, I can drive a further wedge by which I discriminate between the trauma memory and now what's happening to me. I notice. And this is an established tool called discrimination training within trauma work. Why I introduce it last and I introduce it during exposure is because to be able to do discrimination training, we need to contain the memory, and we need to call upon that modern brain, that cortex, to do that symbolic job of discriminating. We know by now from the video on biology that the cortex works more slowly, And the animal brain is very want to take over to try and protect us. So we needed the skills for the animal brain, the relaxation work, the grounding work, before we came to use the modern brain's tool of discrimination, training and spotting the difference. But as we're there, as the exposure is going well and as it's contained, this is something else we can do. Try to spot the difference, and we will start to discriminate between safe situations and not, which will help us further. I really hope this video has been helpful today, and I hope you've enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe to Beacon Psychology Service for more videos about trauma and other subjects. Thank you.